Sculptures and paintings have been an integral part of secular and religious architecture everywhere. In particular, these art forms have a symbiotic relationship with temple art. Ancient Sanskrit texts, however, consider painting to be the supreme among all art forms, as it is more expressive and narrative than sculpture, for instance. Perhaps that is why painting has held pride of place in palaces, viharas and temples since ancient times. Paintings done on walls are known either as frescoes or murals. While frescoes are paintings done on walls when the plaster is still wet, murals, on the other hand, are paintings executed generally on dry walls. The tradition of murals in India dates back to the cave paintings of Ajanta, executed between the 2nd century BC and the 6th century AD, depicting Buddhist themes. Since those times, successive societies have used the medium of murals to express innate human feelings towards the divine and to translate the essence of religion and mythology into visual reality. This exquisite art form has evolved into various stylistic schools, differing in composition perspective, body posture and decorative elements. Wide open eyes, exaggerated eyebrows, ornamental headgears and hand gestures are some of the distinctive features in a Kerala mural. Intricate details and rich color are other typical features, no matter which temple walls in Kerala they embellish. What gives visual commonality to Kerala murals is the practice of artists to follow the descriptions of deities and events as detailed in Dhyana Slokas, the invocative songs. For instance, the spectacular mural that depicts the cosmic dance of Lord Shiva is based on the Shiva Tandava Dhyana Sloka.
Manmala mani veena vatta kapalam, Manmala mani veena vatta kapalam, Shulam pasham parashuvanni, Shulam pasham parashuvanni, Kadum tudinam Rudrakshamikshi, Kadum tudinam Rudrakshamikshi, Navachandra bhujangalila, Nritta priyaya varadaya, Nritta priyaya varadaya, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya.
Satsangs make the creation of murals dependent on rules as laid down in the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, the Abhila Siddhartha Chintamani and the Shilparatna. These texts divide the art of mural creation into 3 stages: preparation of the wall, sketching of the outline, and application of color and finer details. This 3-stage tradition of painting murals is being followed by artists in Kerala even today. The wall preparation in itself involves 3 stages of plastering using natural materials. The creeper Cissus glauca, commonly known in Kerala as Unyalavalli, provides the glue. This gluey solution, extracted from the creeper, is added to sand and lime mixtures to obtain the plaster for the first coating. Now the preparation of plaster for the second coat. A lime sand mixture is finely ground along with cotton. The cotton fibers help color seep deeply into the plaster. In addition, it prevents cracking of the walls. plastering material for the third stage is prepared by mixing tender coconut water with fine lime. After filtering out the grainy residue, the lime slurry is applied repeatedly till the surface becomes smooth. The Panchavarna or the five colors that give a divine vibrance to temple murals are extracted from plants and minerals. The red that is used to heighten the rajasic quality of the characters and also the yellow are obtained from the abundantly available laterite. The black is obtained by keeping a mud pot over a lamp for a long period. The soot deposited on the inner surface is collected and used for the black color. While blue is extracted from the leaves of Indigofera tinctoria, locally known as Nilamari, green is obtained by mixing Nilamari with Arabicera, a plant extract. These colors are then dried. The dried pellets are mixed with water and neem gum to achieve the desired color saturation. For painting, brushes are specially made from the arrow grass, scientifically known as Heteropogon contortus, that grows in the wild. The spikelets of the grass are seasoned by boiling them in milk. This makes the spikelets smooth and supple. The hairs of the seasoned spikelets are then carefully plucked. Finally, they are bunched together to form the brush. The actual painting is a form of devotion on the part of the artist. It is a long-drawn process spreading over several months. This process begins with drawing the outlines of the characters and accompanying objects in conformity with the details as described in the Dhyana slokas. Once the outlines of the characters are done, the process of color filling begins. First, it is yellow that is applied, wherever needed, depending upon the color scheme. Then red for the body texture, costumes and other decorative elements. Over a thin coat of copper sulfate, green is then applied. White color is usually the surface white of the plaster that is left unpainted. The artists then outline the features of the characters with black to make each one of them stand out distinctively. The eye is the last detail to be filled in, bringing the mural finally alive. The human eye and senses too are awakened by the visual feast that a Kerala mural serves up, replete with its time-honored and divine imagery and glimpses of the eternal.
Hello and welcome to a session on understanding the camera lens. For a video camera to operate, it must be able to concentrate light reflected from the surface of subjects to create an image. In current models of cameras, this function is provided by the lens, a series of optical glass or plastic elements cemented together and mounted in such a way as to focus light on the surface of the light conversion tubes or chips. The lens is mounted permanently on the front of a consumer quality camera. In equipment used at the professional level, interchangeable lenses may be used. The three basic characteristics of a lens are its focal length, its focus range, and its aperture settings. Focal length. The focal length of a lens is a measurement usually given in millimeters of the ratio between the diameter of the lens and the distance from its optical center to the focal plane, the location of the chip faces. The important factor to remember about focal length is that the longer the measurement, the greater the enlargement of the subject. The shorter the measurement, the smaller the subject will appear. Conversely, the longer focal length allows space for fewer subjects in the frame, and the shorter focal length allows more subjects to be included in the frame. In addition, the longer the focal length, the more compressed the distance appears going away from the camera, called the x-axis. Also, movement in front of the camera, the x-axis appears to be accelerated. The apparent distances on the x-axis using a short focal length lens appear to be increased, and movement on the x-axis appears to be slowed down. The focal length of a lens also determines its ability to focus over a range from close to farther away from the camera, called depth of field. Other characteristics of lenses determined by the focal length are explained later in the section. Focus. The ability of the lens to concentrate light reflected from a subject to create the sharpest image is called focus. Focus is a relative term because a lens is in focus on an image when that image appears as sharply and clearly as possible on the surface of the chips. There are two separate ways to focus an image. Front focus is achieved by adjusting, usually by turning the barrel of the lens, until the image is sharply focused at a point behind the lens, called the focal point. The second way to focus is the back focus. Back focus involves adjusting either the lens body or the pickup surface until an image located an infinite distance from the camera is in focus on the surface of the chips. The back focus is a technician's adjustment and should not have to be readjusted unless the camera or lens is jarred or bumped out of adjustment. Focusing a zoom lens is more complex than focusing a prime or fixed focal length lens, which is used in feature film productions. The lens must be zoomed to its maximum focal length, framed and focused on the intended subject, and then zoomed back to the desired framing. All subjects located the same distance from the camera as the original subject will be in focus. Shooting any subject closer or further away from the camera requires resetting the focus. There are a number of techniques that camera operators use to capture the action in focus. The most popular method is called follow focus. This technique requires the camera operator to continually change the focus as he or she follows the action, constantly turning the focus ring to keep the subject sharp whenever it begins to soften. However, focusing is not always as easy as that. With practice, it can become a reflexive action. That does not mean it becomes easy. Zone focusing. It refers to when camera operators are assigned a zone on the field of play or at a news event. They calculate the aperture so that basically everything will be in focus when the player or other subject moves into their zone. They generally do not try to shoot the subject when they are outside of their zone. Pre-focusing is when the camera operator focuses the camera on the subject before beginning to record. Aperture. The third basic characteristic of a lens is its aperture or iris setting. To better control the amount of light that strikes the surface of the tubes or chips, an iris or variable opening is built into the lens. A numbering system was developed in the early days of photography and remains in use today, not only in photography but also in cinematography and videography. The carefully calibrated sizes of the opening in the aperture are labeled with numbers called f-stops. Although the numbering system may seem strange, each full f-stop doubles if opening or halves if closing the amount of light allowed to pass through the lens. The f-stop number is the ratio of the focal length to the diameter of the aperture opening. The common full f-stops used in videography are f1.4, f2, f2.8, f4, f5.6, f8, f11, f16 and f22. The term stop down means to close the aperture or increase the f-stop number. To open up means to increase the size of the aperture opening, thus decreasing the f-stop number. An easy way to remember the change is to think of f-stops as fractions. 1 by 22 is smaller than 1 by 1.4. When a camera operator alters the aperture of the lens, two things happen simultaneously. The aperture changes the brightness of the lens image falling onto the chip, altering the picture's exposure. The aperture modifies the depth of field, affecting the sharpness of anything nearer and further than the actual focus distance. We have three options when selecting the lens aperture. Choose an f-stop to suit the exposure. Adjust the lens aperture to give a properly exposed picture so that you can see tonal gradation and details clearly in the subject. If there is insufficient light, you may need to add additional lighting. If there is too much light so that the shot is overexposed, the lighting on the subject may need to be reduced. Reduce the lens aperture, stop down, or add a neutral density filter. Choose an f-stop that gives a specific depth of field. People usually concentrate on getting the exposure right and accept whatever depth of field results. However, there will be times, especially in close-up shots, when it is not possible to get the entire subject in sharp focus. In other words, there is insufficient depth of field. Then it is necessary to reduce the aperture and increase the amount of light going into the camera until the exposure is right. Settle on an f-stop that averages the lighting situation. There may be times when the camera operator has little or no control over the amount of light on the scene, or when the camera needs to move around under varying light conditions. In these situations, there may be little choice but to adjust the lens aperture manually for the best average exposure, or to switch on the camera's automatic iris control and accept whatever depth of field results. Depth of field. Each of the previous characteristics of the lens, focal length, focus range and aperture, f-stops, is a tool to use in controlling the image desired by the videographer. Focal length affects how many subjects, how much of the subject and the size of the subject in the frame. It also alters the appearance of subjects by distorting their size. See earlier discussion. Focus directs the attention of the viewer by placing important subjects in focus and less important subjects out of focus. Changing the focus, called rolling or pulling focus, can also guide the attention of the viewer from one subject to another. The f-stops must be set within the technical limitations of the camera and source of light so that there is enough light for the chips to create an image and not too much light that chips are overpowered. Changing the f-stop can alter the mood and apparent time of day. Slight underexposure can give the appearance of evening, early morning or even night time, or suggest a gloomy, dramatic mood. Slight overexposure can give the impression of bright daytime or lend a comic, light-hearted feeling. A fourth characteristic of lenses, depth of field, in short DOF, is dependent on the three characteristics described previously. Depth of field is the distance from the camera that subjects appear in acceptable focus. This distance depends on the focal length of the lens, its focus setting and the aperture opening. The longer the focal length, the closer the focus point, the wider the aperture setting, the shallower the depth of field. The converse is also true. Depth of field is critical when trying to focus on close-ups or on rapidly moving subjects, such as in sports and when light levels are limited. Depth of field also may be used creatively to exclude from subjects by placing them out of focus but within the frame. The depth of field varies with the following factors: the distance at which the lens is focused, the size of the image sensors, the focal length of the lens, the lens f-stop aperture. What is exposure? Every video camera requires a certain amount of light to function effectively and produce quality images. However, the chips can only handle a limited range of tones. When shots contain a wide range of tones, brightness values, directors cannot hope to reproduce them all absolutely accurately in the final image. If the amount of light from a surface exceeds the chip's upper limit, it will reproduce as white in the video picture. It will burn out or clip to a blank white. Conversely, when a surface reflects too little light, it will fall beyond the system's lower limit and crush to an overall black tone. The average brightness of the lens image falling onto the chip is primarily determined by the lens aperture, f-stop. The goal is to adjust the aperture so that the most important tones, usually people's faces, are clearly visible. This process is called adjusting the exposure. Correct exposure is a subjective choice. No one can judge whether a film shot is going to turn out right until it has been processed, developed and printed. So it's extremely important for the filmmaker to calculate the correct exposure before shooting. Otherwise, entire sequences could be wildly wrong. White balance. Some people mistakenly think all you need to do is find a scrap of white paper or card, put the card in front of the camera and press the button marked white balance. Well, there's more to it than that. If you want to have complete control over the video, you should. What is white balance? White balance is a camera control that adjusts the camera's color sensitivity to match the prevailing color of outdoor light, cooler, indoor light, warmer, or fluorescent light, greener. On most cameras, white balance may be set either automatically or manually. On professional cameras, white balance can be set to match exactly the light source you are shooting with. Auto white balance. Many cameras allow completely automated white balance. Many of us are fooled into thinking that we don't have to worry about whether shooting indoors or out. The camera makes the color